Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Daily Doc Talk. I am your host, Dr. Drew Timmermans. Today I want to talk to you about another hormone issue that I commonly see, which is hypothyroidism or even subclinical hypothyroidism, and why just testing TSH is not a good enough, strong enough marker for evaluating thyroid function. And so let's take a step back for a second. So TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, comes from the pituitary gland, and that goes down to the thyroid and tells the thyroid to produce T4, which is the inactive form of thyroid hormone. That T4 then gets converted in different tissues in the body into T3, which is the active form of the thyroid hormone, and then that thyroid hormone is able to exert its effects, with the main effects occurring in the mitochondria, which is why when you have low thyroid hormones, some of the symptoms you're going to see are brain fog, fatigue, muscular weakness, hair thinning, things like that. And so, when we piece this out and look at it from a global picture, we have communication coming from the brain, which is then going down to the organ, and the organ is then producing the hormone based off of what the brain is telling it to. However, that communication is not always optimal. And even if it is, sometimes the conversion of the thyroid hormone from T4 into T3 is not always optimal in the tissues. And so there's two kind of areas that we can have, that we can have shortcomings in the traditional thyroid testing. And so our optimal lab values that we're looking at for TSH are going to be around anywhere between 1 to 2. However, the range that we typically see on the reference range for the lab is going to be anywhere from about 0.5 up to 4. And so, we have this large spectrum here, but sometimes we can have that TSH be totally normal, and even let's say it's optimal at 2 or 2.5, which is pretty close, if the thyroid is not getting enough of a signal at that level. So let's say a TSH of 2 for me is different than my thyroid responds differently than your thyroid at TSH of 2. I might produce more T4 at that TSH level of 2, and you might produce less. And that's a communication error from the brain down to the thyroid gland. And so you could have a normal TSH, but you could still have suboptimal or even low values in the thyroid hormone. As the thyroid hormone circulates throughout your body, it's supposed to have a feedback mechanism up to the brain to tell the brain what levels it's at, so that way you can adjust based on that. And so what's supposed to happen, and what normally happens, is if thyroid hormone becomes low in the blood, that travels back up to the brain. It stimulates the brain and says, hey, we have low thyroid hormone, produce more. And so that's when TSH would go up, therefore telling the thyroid to produce more thyroid hormone. However, it gets kind of a little complicated and a little murky because we have the thyroid hormone that's in the blood, but then we also have intracellular thyroid hormone, and that's the hormone that exerts all the effects. And so once the thyroid hormone gets transported into the cell, it then gets converted into the active form into T3, from T4. And then from there, it's able to do its job. However, sometimes, and this kind of goes a little deeper, the deiodinase enzymes, which are responsible for converting the T4 into T3, aren't functioning as well as they should, and they're impeded, and that could be due to changes in leptin and adiponectin levels. It could be due to extra stress in your life, viral load, low testosterone. There's a whole host of things that can change and alter the mechanisms of the deiodinase enzymes, and you can have this kind of improper or inefficient conversion of T4 into T3. And so we could have TSH be normal, we could have T4 be normal, we can even have T3 be normal in the blood, but if in the cells it's not getting converted into T3 and it's not exerting its effects, then you can have symptoms of hypothyroidism, and we typically call that intracellular or subclinical hypothyroidism. Even outside of that, if we don't necessarily have a intracellular conversion issue, there's still instances where a patient comes in and their TSH is okay at 2.5, we'll say, but then free T4 and free T3 are on the lower end of normal. And just in that person, that may present as hypothyroid symptoms. And so even though they're not clinically hypothyroid based on the lab, they're fatigued, they have brain fog, they're having weight gain, their hair is brittle, they're losing hair, their nails are brittle, they're constipated, a lot of different things. And it's basically just a slowing down of the body. And so that's why it's so important to look at more than just TSH. Because if in that patient, for example, you just looked at TSH and saw 2.5, a lot of doctors would just say, well, your TSH falls between 0.5 and 4, so no thyroid issues. And again, it goes back to that conversation of medicine is not black and white. There's gray zones, there's a spectrum, and we're all gonna lie somewhere in that spectrum. And so it's important to take that context of the lab and the symptoms and apply it to the patient and not just treat based off the labs, and especially when we're only running a minuscule kind of narrow-minded look at thyroid, which is just TSH. So to recap, if you suspect that you're having any subclinical or clinical hypothyroidism, make sure you're getting a full hypothyroid panel. And so that's looking at TSH, free T3, free T4 for the most part. If you've never had the thyroid antibodies done, which is going to be TPO and TBG, then you're going to want to have those run as well, just to make sure that you don't, or to assess if you do have a Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, which is an autoimmune attack and is actually the most common form of hypothyroidism. So make sure you're looking at the big picture and fit it in with the context. I want to thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next time.